Okay, cool. So today we are going to jump into, we are kind of beginning week 6 here now, which is kind of the prelude week to preparing to start doing flight planning. So everything we kind of do talk about this week is we're going to start looking at all of the items that prepare us to get into manual flight planning. Now, a lot of this, you're going to notice, you can start looking through the syllabus, but you can kind of see here that most of this stuff we've already covered. This is stuff that, you know, as far as individually speaking, like if you look at day 1 here, you know, it talks about aircraft systems. And if you look at yesterday, the reason I kind of lumped some of yesterday's stuff into today's is because most of all of this stuff that we're going to see over the next week is primarily review stuff, okay, primarily. There is a few new things, like today we're going to look at NOTAMs. I know we haven't really dived into NOTAMs, but we're going to look at them in depth today and know how to read them and how to interpret them and decode them. But most of the stuff, like I said, is going to be a review. Like yesterday's stuff is all the different weather charts and stuff. We already went through weather. We looked at all these charts. Everything that's listed on here we've already looked at. But we're just going to start kind of looking at stuff individually and just kind of talking about how we use each one of those in preparation for doing a dispatch release. We've talked about everything as a general idea and kind of what it is specifically, but not necessarily at what point in the process we use it in doing a dispatch release, and that's kind of what we're going to be doing this week. So the aircraft system stuff, you can see a lot of tomorrow's stuff, the route of the flight, how we basically get into doing the routes, but you can kind of see as we go along here, weight and balance again, start seeing, kind of like I was saying, like as we've gone over a lot of the stuff in the past, I've kind of told you in some situations like not to worry if you weren't getting it too much then, because we start to review everything again and kind of go over it. That's kind of what the process we're at now. We're kind of now going to go back through. We've kind of covered most of the general material, and now we're going to review and put it into practical use on how we're going to do it. And then you can see next week, day 5, is the actual first day of manual flight planning. Just as a heads up, that day there, let's see, now day 5, day 6. A lot of this stuff will be, even though it says they will be kind of on the online format because it's day 5 and 6, but it'll basically kind of just be me, like video-wise, showing how you start to go through stuff. But then on a week from today, on Thursday next week, is when we actually will do like the first, like, you know, we're going to pick a city pair and we're going to do a route, and we're going to do it like together in class. So anyway, just to kind of let you guys know what to expect over the next week. So we're going to talk about NOTAMs first today and start looking at that stuff, and then we'll kind of touch a little bit, or we'll kind of touch on the stuff from yesterday, and then the rest of the stuff you kind of see on there today. But like I said, some of this stuff we may not talk too much in depth or cover directly, but a lot of it, you know, like I said, as we do every single flight plan, all of these processes are just going to be repeated and repeated and repeated. So whether it be the weather, looking at certain charts, looking at NOTAMs, looking at systems, basically every time we do a flight plan from here on out, you're going to see weight and balance again, you're going to see weather again, you're going to see systems. I mean, so if that kind of makes sense, where I'm saying like we're going to just be repeating things over and over, it's kind of well, just the natural process, obviously, for doing a dispatch release. So let's look at NOTAMs to start. I've brought up some cities here. I chose St. George, Salt Lake, Cedar, Denver, and LA. So First off, when we're looking at NOTAMs, I'm going to actually bring up the PDF here. Okay, so I've got the St. George NOTAMs up here. Now, first of all, there are two different types of NOTAMs that we use. Okay, you're going to want to know these two things. There are local NOTAMs, which are called D NOTAMs. You can kind of see at the top of the page here. This is all on. You can see my screen. Everyone can, right? Okay, cool. D NOTAMs are local NOTAMs. And then we have FDC NOTAMs. So let's first talk about the D NOTAMs. D NOTAMs are just NOTAMs that are for a specific airport. So that's why they call them local NOTAMs. It's just stuff for that airport. I know we've kind of maybe seen a few NOTAMs so far, but the way that these NOTAMs read here, kind of like, you know, when you're looking at your METARs and your TAFs, your NOTAMs are kind of similar. So the very first thing you see is obviously going to be the airport identifier for the NOTAM. So we can see on that top line here, SGU. Then the second portion, this highlighted portion here, means the first two digits is going to be the month that the NOTAM was issued. And the second after the slash, the 3 digits there, signifies the NOTAM number. So in this case, that first NOTAM you see, it was obviously in June 06, and then it is the 9th NOTAM for the month of June, if that makes sense. So every NOTAM just gets a number like of when it was issued. So when you start a new month, the very first NOTAM that airport issues for that month is just simply always going to be 07/001. It's the first NOTAM for the month of July. Smaller airports don't have that many NOTAMs, as you can see. Once you start looking at other NOTAMs for other airports, like big airports, you know, they get up into the 900,000, or more NOTAMs a month because there's just simply so much stuff. But small airport like St. George, it doesn't look like that bottom one down there is up to 16. I'm not sure, so they maybe 1 a day, 2 a day, if even that. So anyway, so that's what that means then. So the way that reads, St. George, month of June, 9th NOTAM, or 9th NOTAM for the month of June there. Then it repeats, for whatever reason, the station identifier, St. George. And then after that, it's basically what's going on and what's out of service, or what the issue is. Now there's going to be a whole slew of different types of acronyms that you're going to see in NOTAMs. Some you may know, some you may not know, some that you're going to see a lot more than others. But the big thing about NOTAMs from a dispatch perspective is that you want to filter down what do dispatchers actually care about in NOTAMs. And the nice thing is, despite some airports having hundreds of NOTAMs, dispatchers really only care about very, very, very few NOTAMs. So if you want to write these down, write down the acronyms Runway, RWY, NAV for either navigate or navigation, ILS, instrument landing system, VOR, ALS, which is approach light system. Let's see here. Those OTS, which means out of service. And that's all I can think of really on the top of my head. So what you ultimately do as a dispatcher is you're really training, you try to train your mind how to just quickly scan NOTAMs, searching for like specific acronyms. That's all you're really looking for. And so if you can kind of see here, this is, St. George is a bad example because there's so few NOTAMs, but you'll see here later on, like when we get to Salt Lake as an example. See this column right here? Now if you look here and just look straight down, NOTAMs are supposed to be aligned so that they kind of look like columns if you're like looking up and down them. So obviously when you're looking at a NOTAM, you should hopefully know what airport you're looking at. So it's not like you need to look at the station identifier. You really don't care about the NOTAM number. You know, I mean, if you had to tell somebody else what NOTAM you're talking about, you'd maybe need to refer to the NOTAM, or if you needed to relay to a pilot, you know, some information, and you're talking about a NOTAM, you could put the NOTAM number. But other than that, you know, when you as a dispatcher are looking at NOTAMs and scanning NOTAMs, your eyes should go directly to this column right here. And as you scan, this is pretty much the only thing you need to look at. You'd scan up and down. And when you see one of the acronyms, you're just looking for just your small list of you know, red light acronyms that should catch your eye. And if you see one of those, then yeah, you may want to read the rest of the NOTAM basically. So if it makes sense, if you're kind of like looking in a column and just, if you started at the top and just started looking down until you see an acronym, one of your ones on your list, then you see one, and then you know, if you see one like Runway, obviously like the second one here, Runway should catch your eye. And then as you start reading, you know, it'll make you want to read everything to the right of it, is what it should do. So kind of obviously more of a trained process, and you get better at it over time. But you should be able to, you know, once you get really comfortable and familiar, you should be able to go through a hub airport's NOTAMs, you know, in a matter of seconds, really. You know, it shouldn't take you really all that long. But anything that doesn't, it's not one of like your key acronyms that you're looking for, you can disregard it. Anything about taxiways, like this one that says COM, you know, that's rarely something that you would ever be concerned about. I mean, this thing that says service, not really something that we care about. Like, it's a service item for the airport, but it's not something, you know, that a dispatch is concerned about. Really, dispatch cares about runways, they care about nav aids, they care about approach light systems, they care about instrument landing systems, VORs. That's really what you guys care about, because all of those things affect your aircraft performance and your availability for weather minimums and things like that. So you can you just have to learn how to sift through all the garbage, not look at the stuff that's not pertinent, and just only look at the stuff that is. So even when you find an acronym that is one of your key ones that you're looking for, like Runway, a lot of the time it's still going to be a NOTAM that has really nothing to do with anything you care about usually. Like, for instance, this first one here, this Runway 19. I think we were talking about this the other day when we were driving our cars up and down the runway. Irregular surface bumps, you know, from 6,000 feet remaining marker to 3,000 foot remaining marker. So 3,000 foot stretch of runway that has those bumps in it. Now, we obviously were talking about it and stuff, but dispatcher really would not care about that at all. It's the pilot's responsibility is to go through the NOTAMs as well. So when they get a dispatch release, they get their weather packet and stuff. It has all the NOTAMs. It is their responsibility to go through and look at that kind of stuff. It's not the dispatcher's responsibility. So then you can see this next NOTAM is the same NOTAM. It's just reversed. It's for runway 1, and it's just the opposite from going the other direction, but irregular surface bumps. You'll see a lot of acronyms, like I said, that you probably do not know what they mean. However, if it's an acronym that you don't know what it means, that really just means that it's not dispatch important. So it's not a big deal. Like these ones down here, service, I mean, that's not normally something that you're going to stop on, but just for the sake of looking at it, it says PCL. I'm not sure. PCL, I think, is probably some sort of a light, but I'm not even sure about that. But runway 1, runway end, identification light, out of service. I mean, some stuff you can just kind of make sense of and look at it. This other one here, service item, PCL, runway 19, approach light system commissioned. So now the other thing is when you see an acronym over here, that's one of the ones that you look for. Like you can see runway here, and then you can see ALS. Those are both things we look for, but we look for them in this column. When you see them over here, as long as it's not an acronym over here that you're looking for, then it's not really that big of a deal. So like you can tell on this service, and this is just just giving us information about the runway, but the NOTAM itself is not for the runway. It's not signifying that there's something wrong with the runway. So let's look at, I'm going to skip FDC here for a minute. Let's look at Salt Lake's local NOTAMs. And like I said, just take your eyes into this column right here, and
so that means there's like 117 issued just for June.
Yeah, and that's low for a hub like Salt Lake. Salt Lake actually, of all big airports, has more of a respectable low amount of NOTAMs now. Wait till you see LA. In a minute here, you'll see LA. But just scan that right there for a second. Tell me, out of all of those NOTAMs that you can see, I may need to scroll down, but out of the ones you can see, just by quickly scanning, do you see anything on there that is something that we care about, or something that you might consider a pertinent NOTAM for dispatcher?
That one about the capture.
Yeah.
Runway 16 of the ALS, not.
So that one means monitored. It means, which it doesn't mean that it's out of service. It just means that, so inside the control tower, when they turn on the approach light system, they have these diagrams on their little desks or whatever, but it shows them when the runway lights are on at a big airport, not like obviously at a non-towered airport like here, but at a towered airport, if the runway lights are on, it actually has like a little mini diagram of the runway inside of, they got like a mini diagram of the entire airport, but it has a little thing that like lights up. It'll show you that the runway lights are on. It'll show you that the approach light system is on. So what that tells me, or what that means, is that their little diagram inside of the tower, like maybe they have a bulb burnt out or something, but they can't, inside the tower, they can't tell if it's on or not because the lights aren't lighting up. That's all it means. But the approach light system itself is actually working. It's just not monitored.
What's the blast pad marking, John?
not standard. So yeah, runway 35 blast pad marking not standard. I'm not sure exactly. I mean, I know what the blast pad stuff is, but this is basically just saying that the marking that's painted on the ground, signifying that it is a blast pad, is a non-standard marking. I'm not sure what makes it non-standard, because I'm not sure what even the marking for a blast pad looks like. But yeah. But yeah, as soon as you see something like you see runway 35 blast pad, as soon as you get the blast pad, at that point you pretty much stop reading. But it does take a while to kind of get used to, well, what's important, what's not important, like what means something. So that the biggest one on there, out of the ones you can see, the only one that really is a dispatch, cares about, type NOTAM, is this nav right here. So that is saying nav. So the ILS for runway 16 right, Cat 2, is NA, which means not authorized. That might be another acronym you might want to write down, is NA equals not authorized. Another one also is put AD, which stands for aerodrome. Also CLSD, which is just closed. Anyway, so yeah, that's just basically telling us that the Category 2 approaches are not authorized. Category 1 is fine, which is the standard ILS, but the Category 2 is not. So if the weather's really bad in Salt Lake and you're trying to shoot an approach on 16 right, then the lowest you could do is just regular Category 1, the 200.5 approach. So yeah, so this other stuff down here, obstacle. So if you remember when we were talking about those towers, so this is an obstacle. It's a tower light. And this ASR unknown, I'm not sure, was that in here that we were talking about how like all of the little radio antenna towers have like a serial number attached to them? They're all listed with the FCC so that they know. So when this is telling us that like there's a tower, now we don't care about towers that have lights out on them necessarily for dispatch, but this is just basically saying that little serial number is unknown. So usually it'll list the number so that if you really wanted to dive in and see exactly what tower it is that's missing a light, then you can look up that number with the FCC and it'll tell you exactly where it's at, like over here on the hill or whatever. So yeah, look at the rest of these. Obstacle, apron, we don't care about. Apron, taxiways, we don't care about. And then apron. So really, out of all these Salt Lake NOTAMs, actually there's more down here now. Taxiway, 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 apron, 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 taxiway, apron, apron. Kind of see just scrolling through here. Obstacle, obstacles. Yeah, all the way to the bottom there. There's nothing that we care about except for that one nav ILS one here, this one. So and that's a decent amount for Salt Lake. They usually don't have that many. Let's take a look at Cedar City. Okay. Obstacle, obstacle, runway. Runway 26, runway end, identification light out of service. Okay. Don't really care. It's nav, we care about this one. ILS, runway 20, MEGI, which is the let's see, the lower outer marker, or the left outer marker. Anyway, anytime you see these where it refers to like a point, so Meggy is a point along the approach. It's an intersection along the approach, but when it says if you see an LOM or anything, any letter OM, they're basically standing for like markers and intersections along the approach, and then it says decommissioned. So those ones, same thing, they don't have anything, any importance to dispatch. Taxiway, runway 826 east of runway 20, closed to helicopters run on landing. So we stopped because of runway, but then it's just saying east of runway 20 is closed. So nothing on the runway is closed. And then runway 2, left traffic pattern except for helicopters. That just basically means that any aircraft using runway 2, they fly a left traffic pattern, which is not something we care about. Runway 20 is obviously the opposite, so it's saying it's a right traffic pattern except for helicopters. And then runway 2 and 20 is closed to helicopters run on landings. Also don't care about that. And then here's that one, AD means aerodrome. Aerodrome means the entire airport. So that means the airport as a whole is what aerodrome is talking about. So it says aerodrome. So no auto rotation training to helipad. That's just, yeah, so just a helicopter thing, but it's telling us that the entire airport does not allow auto rotation training. So the only time when you see AD, the only time you look at AD and it will be something that you care about is when it says AD closed. So aerodrome NOTAMs will usually have no importance to you unless it says closed, which means the airport is closed. So if you see AD closed, then that means that everything there is closed. Every runway is closed. Any operation on the entire airport, taxiing, landing, anything is closed. You'll see that when an airport gets closed down due to weather or something like that, or gets like when St. George had the snowstorm a few years ago, there was a NOTAM, SGU, AD closed. And then it'll tell you the timestamp of the NOTAM here. So we haven't looked at this yet, but we'll start looking at these timestamps as well. Let's see here. Okay. So some of these, actually it's kind of crazy that, so if you look at Cedar City's NOTAMs here, okay, some of these NOTAMs you can see are 09. There's only one in this list here that we're looking at. So these ones are all 06, which are actually from this month, but then the rest of them are actually NOTAMs from previous months. They're just really old NOTAMs. If you take a look at these NOTAMs right here, all of them are 09. So September. If you come over here, you would think that that just means September of last year, but it doesn't. You come over here, when you read these dates, the first 2 digits is the year. The second 2 is the month. The third 2-digit pair is the day. And then the last 4 is the timestamp in Zulu. So 2014, September 23rd, 2014 at 22:36 Zulu is when this NOTAM was issued. and then you'll always see the dash, and then the dash, and then the next line is supposed to mean, like if we come up here, like looking at this one, this NOTAM here, June 16th, 2017 at 0700 Zulu is when it was issued, and it's valid until, or sorry, this is not when it was issued, but this is the validity time of the NOTAM. So a lot of times you'll see a NOTAM that's out, it's published, but the actual valid time for the NOTAM is still in the future. So this NOTAM is technically one of those. It's a note. They'll issue a NOTAM to let you know that tomorrow morning for a few hours, this is what's going to be going on. So even though it's not happening right now, you always need to make sure you just check those timestamps, because sometimes you'll see runway closed, but it's not for right now. It's actually for the next morning. It's for tomorrow morning or something. So when you see one that's actually valid that you're going to read, make sure you also look at the timestamps. Like for you guys in crew support, like sometimes sometimes when we have those curfews going into Mexico that we're always trying to beat, well, you can jump into the NOTAMs and you can see that they have a NOTAM for the runway closing, but there was for a couple of weeks, there were a few dispatchers that, and everyone was really guilty of it, but I should say that there was, at one point, a dispatcher came up and he's like, hey, so this Guadalajara curfew thing that we have, the NOTAM is in there, and it says the time that it starts, and then, we know that the flight needs to arrive before that NOTAM starts, but one guy also noticed that on one particular day, it was only being closed for an hour. And so we were used to it just being closed from this time, and then it's closed for like 7-8 hours, and it doesn't open back up until the morning, right? But on one particular day, it was only being closed for an hour. And we just were so in the habit of thinking, oh, there's the curfew, we got to be in before that time. And in this case, the flight was not making the curfew, and then we were thinking it was going to cancel, but then he brought it to our attention. But I said, it's only closed for an hour, so we just ended up delaying the flight and just arrived after the NOTAM. But it was like...
So was that an error on Guadalajara's part, or is that...
No, it was valid. They were really only closing it for an hour that night, and then it reopened after.
Oh, wow.
So there was actually, we came to find out that on a couple of nights per week, that's what they did. And so like on, I don't know, like on 2 of the days per week, they only closed it for an hour. So then we started like really looking, like looking at the NOTAM better. But I'm sure that there were probably several of those flights that we actually canceled that were probably the 1-hour closures that we just didn't look at, or that, it's really the dispatcher's responsibility technically to look at that. But anyway, these ones down here though, where it says, so this one's been out since 2014, and then this just means that it is permanent. It will never expire. Okay, so let's look at Denver. So we've got COM, service, nav. So there's the first one we stop on. VOR/DME, not monitored. So the Denver VOR is not monitored. That is not important to dispatch. So anything that's not monitored, we don't care about. Now if this said Denver nav VOR DME OTS, out of service, then that's something that we would care about, because ILSs and things like that are usually depend on VORs in order for their reception to fly when the plane flies and is tuning into it. But when a VOR is out of service that's affecting an ILS, you'll usually see several NOTAMs that say Denver VOR out of service, Denver ILS out of service, as well, because it knocks several different things out. So we don't care about this one. It's just a not monitored VOR. Obstacle, don't care about. Apron, taxiway, runway. 17 right and 35 left. It says centerline markings, south side obscured. Then the exact opposite on this next one, centerline markings, north side obscured. So what that means is just simply the center line. So does everyone know what the center line is on a runway? Just the, like you're driving down the road, you got the center line, the lane. So for it's just basically saying that they're obscured. What would on a runway? What would normally obscure a center line? Tire tracks. Yeah. I'm not sure if any of you guys noticed when we drove up and down the St. George runway, but when you drove through the landing zone, the center line was pretty much not visible because there was so much rubber on top of it. So every year, usually every airport, depending on how busy an airport is, but at least once per year, airports go out, usually in the off hours, and they go and they have like a thing that they can put on it, and then they light it on fire, and it burns all that rubber off. I'm not sure if you've ever seen them doing it. Yeah, they burn it off. So, and then they'll usually put a NOTAM for that in there too, like, you know, that they're burning the rubber off.
I know a couple months back, I know that they actually closed the runway at night, and I don't know if that may have been part of what they were doing.
May have been.
It was like down at one end one night and about halfway up the next.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's possible. So that's another reason also, like at some airports, the runway lights, they actually have runway lights that are on the center line, so they don't affect the plane because they're like in the ground, you know, but you can just run over them. But St. George doesn't have those. But in order to be a Cat 2 airport, you normally, for an approach, you have to have lights along the center line. But a lot of airports simply have them just because there's so much tire rubber accumulation that you can't see the center line at all at night anyway, you know, let alone during the day. But at night it has the lights, will still shine through it. Anyway, we don't care about that, by the way. Well, we sometimes do care about that, but the only time we would ever care about this is if they were shooting a Cat 2 approach. But the only reason we would even need that in the first place is if the it might just end up being confusing the way I'm even describing this, but I'll just say it anyway. So when the only time that this would ever play any factor for, and in fact for a dispatcher it really probably never would, but for a pilot, if you're taking off, sometimes when you are taking off in very, very low visibility conditions, like clear down to 600 RVR, you'll see that the RVR, or sorry, not the RVR, but in order to be able, one of the stipulations of being able to take off in that low visibility is that you can see the center line. And you either need to have to be able to see the center line, or it says have center line lights. Otherwise, you have to increase the RVR distance for your takeoff. So that's one of the only things. For a Cat 2 approach, you have to have centerline lights. So that would never actually play a role anyway, because you would have the lights, which would kind of trump that specific NOTAM anyway. But it would just simply be a takeoff thing in really low visibility. If you couldn't see the center line, and that specific runway did not have centerline lights, then you could not go down to the lowest possible takeoff minimums. So anyway.
So seeing that has the date of the 26th, would that just probably be a maintenance thing that they're doing to that, cleaning it up?
Possibly, or maybe maybe they just put it out there because they know that it's going to be like that. Yeah, it could be that they, on the 26th, they plan to go burn it off or something. But apron, taxiway, runway, 826 safety area, not standard, east end, 6-inch ruts. Don't care about that. Same thing on that. It's just the opposite NOTAM. Obstacle runway 26. Let's see, that would be the right threshold light is out of service. Just so you guys know, the only time that we ever care about lights being out of service is when it says ALS, when it's the approach light system that's out of service. If it's any other just lights, we normally don't care. There are some very specific airports which you would get trained on specifically to look for certain NOTAMs when you're dispatching to them, but as a general rule, the only type of lights that we care about being out are simply just the approach light systems as a whole, not like individual little lights like you'll see a lot of NOTAMs for, like this. Because an example, if you're dispatching a flight into Jackson Hole and the PAPI light is out of service, then you can't land. But that's just Jackson Hole. You know, it's kind of like any exceptions to this rule are going to be specifically trained items, like for that airport. And you would have to, like, you know, do that specific training before they would allow you to dispatch to that airport. So that's Denver. Here's LA. So the very first one, runway 6 right / 24 left, closed. So that's one we care about. We cannot use 6 right, 24 left. Now this is also saying, though, that it is from the 17th at 8 Zulu until the 17th, 13 Zulu. So a 5-hour time period, which is mostly tomorrow morning when they're not operating or using the runway anyway. It's closed down. You'll see some airports have this every day, you know, where on their early morning hours where the runways, where there's no arrivals and departures, they just close the runways. Or they only have 2 of the 4 open. Like in this case, LA has 4 runways. Technically 8, but 4, you know, technically 4 runways. Then 7 left, 25 right is closed. From today, that was, actually that's tomorrow, from 8 Zulu to 13 Zulu. So that's one that we definitely care about. Let's keep going down. Taxiway. Runway 7 left. Runway exit sign at taxiway Foxtrot. South side missing. Don't care. So like I said, you'll see a lot of stuff that says runway that'll stop you, but the NOTAM itself is of no importance. Runway 25 right, runway status light system out of service. Don't care. Runway 25 right, distance remaining sign missing. Don't care. Runway 7 left, closed to landing. We care about that one? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and then notice the time on this one. This was May 25th, 2017 to August 19th, 2017. So you guys know all this, these basically daily LA GDPs that we've been dealing with has been for that NOTAM right there, just because we can't land on 7 left.
Now, when you're saying Zulu, that's the Greenwich time, right?
Yeah.
So do you always have to like figure out like Denver's probably 7 hours behind the Greenwich time and all that? So
Well,
you know, like,
yes and no. You don't really have to go figure that out because everything that you're already doing is in Zulu.
Okay.
So when you are looking at your dispatch release program, when you look at your ETA, you're looking at it in Zulu. So then you're looking at the NOTAM in Zulu. You're looking at the weather in Zulu. So you really don't have to know what time that is local, if that makes sense. So you're really not converting. You're just, the only time you ever have to convert is when crew support calls you up. But normally normally I should say the other side across the hall crew support. Sometimes if they call you and they may, but normally,
The scumbags.
no, normally crew support is even giving you stuff in Zulu. Well, I should say always, pretty much. The only time is just a random phone call from somebody like across the hall, or the only other time is really, actually the majority of the time when you're converting is actually at the station, when the station is calling you. Because they're like, I don't know Zulu, you know, like I just. Yeah. But yeah, anybody else, you're talking to a pilot, you're talking to ATC, you're talking to anybody else in the room, fellow dispatchers, coordinators, anybody else, and like I say, even crew support too, they pretty much everyone's speaking Zulu. And everything you're looking at is in Zulu too.
Yeah, I think like pilots are really worthless. Like, can you get that to me in local, like when they're timing out?
Oh yeah.
This is your wheels up, you give it to them, like, what is that in local? I need to know in local. And it's like, you know, they'll be leaving.
Local where? Like,
Yeah, they'll be leaving Mountain, flying to Central, and they give it to me local. So,
Yeah.
this is where mistakes happen.
I really wish that, like, I mean, if you think about it, the world could really just go to just Zulu. You really could. I mean, yeah, it would be weird, but the only reason it'd be weird is because everyone's used to local. They're used to 1 a.m. being dark, you know. But
same with daylight saving. It's like you can get rid of that too.
No, totally.
Add an extra day somewhere.
Totally screws kids up.
There's a Mia. Yeah.
Coco's Arizona.
So do these drop off when the date?
Yeah, if it expires on that, yeah, it'll just drop off.
Should drop off.
Should, yeah.
We should go to Zulu. Never thought about
Yeah, I mean, everyone would know exactly what time something happened. Like if they said that, like that fire that happened in London the other day, well, the fire began at 4 Zulu. Everyone knows. I mean, you know what 4 Zulu here is dark, but in London it's light. Or like maybe light. I guess 4 Zulu is really 4 Zulu in London.
Yeah,
So
they did say it.
yeah,
That happened 6 hours ago.
yeah.
Right.
But other than that, I mean, you would just know where you live is this time. You know, it's not a big deal. So yeah, close to landing on that one. 7 left / 25 right. So this is saying the west 1,300 feet is closed. That basically means the westernmost 1,300 feet of the runway. So 7 left, 25 right. If you were to look at it, go to the west, that last, the 1,300 feet on the most western side. And then it'll tell you declared distance of the runway. 7 left. TORA means takeoff runway available is 9,665 feet. Takeoff distance available, 9,665 feet. ASDA means available, not available, it's aircraft stopping distance available, 9,255 feet. Landing distance available, 0 feet. And that's just simply because this NOTAM. Runway 25 right, takeoff runway available, 10,808. Anyway, you'll get used to these TORA, TODA, ASDAs and what they mean. The next one, nav ILS, runway 25 right, out of service. They actually spelt out of service. They could have just put OTS. But for the same reason, though, we already know that this runway, is 25 right. You can land on 25 right. You just can't land on 7 left. So it's the same piece of concrete. It's just the other end of the runway. You just can't land on it. You can take off on it, and you can land on the opposite end. You just can't land on the 7 left end.
Is that just construction reasons?
Yeah, just construction reasons. And then, yeah, ILS. So but you do know that if you are using 25 right, that you do not have an ILS available. Two 5 right, approach light system out of service. 7 left, approach light system out of service. 7 left, PAPI out of service. 6 right, approach light system out of service. ILS runway 7, GP, that is your glide path and or your glide slope. Is out of service. You do care about that one because if you're, now we already know that we can't land on 7 left. So a lot of these things are redundant, you know. So like this NOTAM doesn't mean anything to us because we can't land on 7 left anyway. It's closed to landing. So, but they still got to put the NOTAM in there saying that the glide path's out of service for whatever reason, and the approach light system's out of service, and the PAPI's out of service.
So even if you have one that covers everything, they have to do each individual item.
They do, yeah. Now when you as a dispatcher, if you see 7 left close to landing, you know that in your head any other NOTAM that has anything to do with 7 left, you can ignore it. Yeah, because it doesn't matter. Now if it wasn't close to landing, then you would care about the approach light system and the glide path being out of service. The approach light system, if the approach light system is out, that means you cannot land on it at night. It has to be day conditions, visible conditions. The glide path out of service means so the glide path makes, so it's saying that it's a problem with the ILS. That's what caught your eye first because of the ILS acronym. But now it's telling you what about the ILS is out of service, or what's the problem? Well, it's the glide path. That makes it so that this ILS is now no longer a precision approach. It makes it a non-precision approach. It makes it a localizer-only approach is what happens there. Which it still is an approach. Like if you actually look at the approach plate for runway 7 left, ILS, you'll see that there is a column that says like the full ILS with everything working. There's one that's just the localizer only. And then there's another one that says like ALS out of service. So you actually have a bunch of different columns, and the corresponding minimums will increase with this being out or that being out or whatever, but they'll increase. Now, the ALS, like the approach light system, if it's out during the night, then, you know, the only time that you could actually do an ILS without the approach light system would be during the day. But it's kind of a weird science, because if you're having to do an ILS during the day, you would think that like the visibility is bad enough that you still would need lights, you know? I mean, it's, if you got fog and stuff, usually the lights will help you, but I guess they're assuming that you can descend underneath the 200 feet, and then once you get under 200 feet, you can see the runway and wouldn't need the lights anyway. So, but anyway, that's those are the local NOTAMs. We can take a break and then we'll look at FTC NOTAMs. You guys ready to look at FTC NOTAMs? Any questions on the local NOTAM stuff, the D NOTAMs? Okay, so just as a reminder, the D NOTAMs, the local NOTAMs, are for just specific stuff at airports. One thing you could add to that is just that they also only cover like items on the airport, like physical items, if that makes sense, like a runway, like markings, like, you know, antennas, you know, actual, you know, the VORs, like things that are actual, like physical things, if that makes sense, you know, whether it be transmission stuff or like, you know, whether it be an antenna or, yeah, I mean, anything, basically a physical item on an airport that's either out of service, closed, or broken, or something, you know, something not working with it. FTC NOTAMs, on the other hand, cover things, they are only for changes to instrument approach procedures, or I should say just instrument procedures. So what that means, essentially, is every airport has different type of approaches. You know, they have some have, you know, if you look at any given airport, it may have an ILS approach, it may have a VOR approach, it might have a GPS approach, an RNAV approach, all sorts of different things. Like as far as approaches go or procedures, it could have CIDs, it could have STARS, any type of a procedure that is like on a chart is basically considered an instrument procedure. Okay. Now, when you look at a chart, you are supposed to follow all of the instructions that that chart has for those procedures, and unless there's an FDC NOTAM or something saying otherwise, you know, you just follow exactly as the chart says. Now, when the FAA deems that there is something wrong with an approach or wrong that needs to be changed or fixed with any instrument procedure for an airport, they will issue an FDC NOTAM. Like I said, FDC NOTAMs are only for changes to instrument procedures. So just looking at this first one, there's only 2 FDC NOTAMs for St. George. They read a little bit different, obviously, here. FDC NOTAMs are I'm not sure how they really even come up with, let's see, the stamp on those things, but they, I believe that the stamp, like, I don't, like FDC NOTAMs are, like, I don't believe they ever end as far as, like, they just keep issuing, like, they, you know, they don't reset each month, basically. They just continue to, like, build and build, like, you know, more and more NOTAMs. And FDC NOTAMs are for, they're not for an area, they're for airports, but the way that they're numbered are going to be for, their number is inside of a certain area. Most of this is not pertinent information when you're looking at these, because if you're going to look at a NOTAM and you want to know the number, you would just say the airport and then you could give them the FDC NOTAM number. But the way that they're actually numbered, as you can see, like here, this is like 7 and then /3285. That 7 and the 3285 signifies like region 7 and NOTAM number 3285 for that region for the FDC NOTAMs. So they're looked up a little bit differently, and they're classified like by regions instead of by the airports, just as far as the number goes. But it will still always have the airport identifier specifically for which airport it's affecting. This first one here just says obviously FDC, so we know that that's just saying the type of NOTAM, and it's for St. George. And IAP stands for Instrument Approach Procedure. And St. George Regional, St. George, Utah. And then this is basically saying that the next line here is which instrument procedures are affected. And this is telling us that the VOR/DME-A and this original-A are the ones that are being affected. So these, when you see an approach like this, and what I'm going to actually do here, I'm going to bring up the charts for St. George's so you guys can see exactly what this looks like. So these are all of these charts in here. These are all the charts for St. George. As you scroll through them, you can see different stuff. You know, one's an airport map. You can also see the LDA for runway 19, the RNAV GPS approach for runway 1. This is a different RNAV GPS approach for runway 1 that has a different date on it. FMS fail procedures, runway GPS, runway 19, RNAV. And then you can see this one down here, VOR DME/A. So this is basically saying, that NOTAM is saying that this is the instrument procedure that it is applying to. So I'm going to bring this up to show you here. This thing will get bigger. It should. Of course. Let's see if I can steal the PDF thing then. So as you can see, this is a Jeppesen chart here. So the VOR DME /A. So when you see this type of, when you don't see an actual runway listed in there, what that means is that it is a circling approach. That means that it is for any airport, or sorry, any runway on the airport. So that's why you don't actually have a runway number on this. But it's just basically telling us that this is the instrument procedure that's being affected by the FDC NOTAM. Now, I know a lot of this probably doesn't make sense to you guys here on what a lot of this means yet, but we will be actually looking at this stuff. But obviously this chart here has a set of instructions on it that are supposed to be followed, but when this FDC NOTAM comes out, this is basically saying that that procedure, so this next line here tells you what the change is, and it's saying procedure not authorized. So it's basically telling us that that circling approach is not authorized. So just meaning right now you cannot use it. So anybody that wants to use the circling approach here in St. George right now is not authorized to use it. And I'm not sure exactly why it's out of service or why it's not authorized, but yeah, they don't necessarily say why, but just that it's not authorized. The next one here, St. George Cid, so standard instrument departure, St. George Regional, St. George, Utah, the JITCA 2 departure. Oh, it finally did go big. You can see right here, there's the JITCA 2 departure, which is a CID. If we bring this up, there it goes. So this is a CID. Everybody should know what a CID is, but this is basically just telling us that this is the route that they're supposed to follow when they take off. Now, if you look at this here, I mean, some of this stuff kind of makes sense. I mean, airport elevation, runways 1 and 19 obtain ATC approval when requesting IFR clearance. Down here, it kind of says a little bit of notes about it. This departure procedure requires takeoff minimums. Runway 1 standard or lower than standard if authorized with minimum climb of 330 feet. Then if you're taking off on runway 19, it says, you know, this set of instructions here. But basically, kind of the overall idea here is that this is a CID and that it has, you know, a certain amount of instructions on here that are expected to be followed. Now, as far as the NOTAM here, it's basically saying that runway 19 departure procedure is not authorized except for aircraft equipped with suitable RNAV system with GPS. Does that make sense, everybody? So if you're flying in an aircraft that does not have RNAV GPS, then you cannot fly that CID. You got to fly some other procedure if there's one available, or don't fly a CID at all. Now you don't have to file CIDs and stars. They're really more important for the big airports. But the reason that this CID exists is really just for the commercial traffic, just really for SkyWest traffic. So if you've noticed, anytime you take off out of St. George going to Salt Lake, you take off. If you take off on 19, you go south, and then you do the big turn. You come back, and then you kind of turn. If you're in the plane, you kind of turn to the left, and you start headed out towards like Enterprise and stuff out that way, and you fly out that direction, and then you kind of turn back. That CID exists really just to separate departure traffic from arrival traffic that comes down the canyon. That's all it's designed to do. It's not, in this case, most CIDs and stars are designed to like reduce ATC workload. Well, there's really no ATC workload at all in this area. It's just really to naturally separate instrument approach and instrument departure traffic without having ATC present. So let's take a look at Salt Lake City's FDC nodes. It's only one. Salt Lake City Instrument Approach Procedure, Salt Lake City International, RNAV GPS Runway 35. It's saying, let's see, the LPMDA is not authorized. So let's see, so RNAV GPS Runway 35, we can just run and take a look at it real quick.
The same landing procedure MDA, and I go look that up.
Oh, landing procedure? Okay, yeah. I didn't really know exactly what the LP meant, but the MDA is the minimum descent altitude. So if we come down, this is the Salt Lake charts now. Just look at RNAV GPS Runway 35. Like I said, I know that everyone's not necessarily familiar with these charts. But the minimum descent altitude is basically it's the altitude that when they're shooting the approach, that the plane is the lowest altitude it can go down to before it has to decide whether they can see the runway and land or go missed. So that's the MDA, the minimum descent altitude. So an RNAV GPS approach is a non-precision approach, so they do not have the vertical guidance on a glide slope. So they, on a non-precision approach, you have the horizontal, the lateral guidance, but you're told basically to descend down to the MDA, and then at that point you have to see whether or not you can visually see the runway and land or not. And if you don't, you go missed. But let's see here. In lieu of MDA height. So okay, yeah, so LP is standing for this right here. So these are two different types of like equipment in GPS. There's LP and then there's LNAV. And we don't necessarily need to know what the difference is there, but it's saying that the minimum, the MDA right here, is 4,560 feet, but that is the actual, that's the elevation, that's mean sea level. So the actual height is 336 feet above ground. But when you're looking at the airplane altimeter, you go down to 4,560 feet because that's what it's going to say on the altimeter, even though it's only 336 feet above ground. So it's basically just telling us that the MDA for this side of the approach, now there's this one as well. This one is still okay because this one's different. It's the LNAV, but this one is not authorized, this side over here. So if you're looking at this chart, the only side you can use is over here. So, and you know, most of this you'll get obviously more familiar with this stuff as you look at them, but generally speaking, you're not necessarily concerned too much with FTC NOTAMs as a general rule. The only time that you even will read FTC NOTAMs, like when you're looking through NOTAMs, you will look through the NOTAMs on every release that you dispatch for both the origin, the departure, and the alternates, but you don't necessarily look at the FTC NOTAMs. What will happen is that there will be certain NOTAMs in the regular D NOTAMs that will kind of basically kind of signal you to actually look at the FTC NOTAMs. So when you see NOTAMs for an ILS being out of service or any type of an approach, a VOR, you know, if a VOR is out of service, an ILS is out of service, any of those things, it tells you that you may, that's the kind of NOTAM that will make you want to look at the FTC NOTAMs. Because if you know that something is out of service that affects instrument approach procedures or just instrument procedures in general, like a VOR, like an ILS, any of those things, then you'll know that usually along with those NOTAMs will be changes to instrument procedures because that item is out of service. So other than that, you normally are not going to even look at the FTC NOTAMs. So if you dispatch 50 flights a day, obviously you're going to look at 50 different, well, 100, at least 100 sets of NOTAMs because of you're going to look at 2 city pairs on each release. But as far as the amount of times you look at FTC NOTAMs would probably be, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 of those 50, if that, you know, kind of helps make sense of it a little bit. Cedar City, instrument approach procedure, ILS or localizer runway 20. So this is basically telling us the change is the missed approach is climb to 6,100 feet, then climbing right turn to 9,900 on a heading 322. And the EHK VOR DME right or radial 278 to the barrel intersection. This is basically telling you that when you fly a missed approach, it tells you, every approach, every instrument approach procedure will have missed approach procedures with it in case you do not land. Because if you don't land, you have a set of instructions as to what you need to do to climb out and, you know, to guide you back up and around. Basically, the idea of an instrument approach procedure as a whole is when you get onto the approach, you'll have what's called the initial approach fix. That's where you start an approach. And then you start flying along that approach. So for instance, let's see here. I'm actually going to bring up, might as well just bring up the Cedar City ILS approach. Okay. Okay. So for when you look at this chart here, all of these charts will show you, it'll show you a profile view, and then like, what's the opposite of a profile? Like a, can't remember. Like it'll show you the side view. Like if you can kind of see here, this is like as if you were looking at it from the side, like coming down, descending, and then there's the runway. If you were looking at it, you know, from the, I guess this is the profile view, right? Mm-hmm. So aerial, yeah, I guess. True, yeah, aerial works. So this is the top-down view, and this is the side view. So when you look at the top-down view, when you follow these charts, you're always following the arrows. So you initially come in from out here, but this first point along this route here, the very first point you see is going to be, well, actually the first point is Milford back up here. So the Milford VOR, you can see always right next to it. Whatever the initial approach fix, it'll always have it right there in parentheses. IAF, which stands for initial approach fix. So Milford is the initial approach fix. That's where this whole approach starts. And as you fly down the approach, you go to this YZEB intersection, and then you go to the Velde intersection, and then you turn, and this is where you actually align yourself with the runway at the Velde intersection, I should say. That's the initial approach fix, and then that's the IF, which should be the final. Yeah, that should be the, okay. Trying to get my bearings straight here. So you have your initial approach fix is where the whole approach itself starts, and then the IF right here is basically the fix where it's kind of the last fix that aligns you with the runway. It's basically your last turn for the runway, and then you start actually flying the approach, and then you can, if you remember this little feather thing, that stands for an ILS. So you actually start picking up the glide slope right here. So the IF, I should say the IF actually stands for, that's your glide slope intercept fix. So you actually pick up the glide slope here, but then it has you start descending down, and then this SEO, you can't see it on this one, but if you come down to this one and look at the profile view, you'll see that it has this little thing right here. It's called a Maltese cross. That means that it is your final approach fix. So anyway, as you're going down this, it has, a set of all these set of instructions. You're supposed to follow this exactly as it is published in this chart. You get down to this altitude, and as you can see down here, if you look at the actual ILS here, it actually tells you the minimums. So this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. So the straight in, so this is the full ILS approach. The visibility right here is a ½ mile, and that's for category A, B, C, and D aircraft. And then this one is the ceiling, which is 220 feet is what it's saying. So it's not a full ILS. It's you can't go all the way down to 200, so it's 20 feet worse than a full ILS basically. But then you can see some of these other things I was talking about. That's the full ILS with everything working. This next column is the approach light system out of service right here. Then the next one, that's also the rail, is the runway alignment indicator lights. So if either that or the approach light system are out of service, the visibility goes from 1/2 and it bumps up to 3/4 instead. Then this one over here is kind of the same idea. The difference between this one and this one here is basically this little comment. It's saying the missed approach requires a minimum climb of 230 feet per nautical mile to 7,300 feet. If your aircraft is not capable of flying that, then you have to go off of this one right here. So there's a lot of little things, and I don't want you guys to be caring too much about any of this right now, just kind of making sense of it so you kind of at least initially see it. Then this one is the localizer only approach with the GS out, which is the glide slope out. like I said, we're going to look at charts every single flight plan we do. So I know it's not making probably too much sense now, but anyway, if you come up here to the top, there's this missed approach procedure right here. It says missed approach, climb to 6,100 feet, then climbing right turn to 9,900 feet on the 322-degree radial heading and outbound on the EHK VOR, then to the barrel intersection, DME 16.5, EHK, and hold and continue to climb in the hold to 9,900 feet. So if you go back and look at our little thing, this is, I'm trying to figure out what part of this has actually changed. Missed approach, climbing to 6,100 feet, then climbing right turn to 9,900 on the heading 322, and the EHK VOR DME 278, to the barrel intersection. Oh, is it the 16.53? No, that's the same too. 322, VOR 278, EHK, hold and climb and hold to 9,900 feet. Not exactly sure what's changing on the approach, but something apparently. It looks identical to me, so I'm not sure why the FTC NOTAM, because this looks identical to what is published. So anyway, FAA for you. The next one here, takeoff minimums and obstacle departure procedures. Departure procedures for runway 2, 8, 20, and 26. Change thence instructions to read climb on EHK, VOR, DME 278 until reaching the MEA, MCA for the direction of flight. Anyway, so this is basically just changing the takeoff minimums and obstacle departure procedures for all runways in Cedar City. So anyway, most of these, like I said, are not really dispatch pertinent. The only time that they ever really play a role is if there's something, like I said, with an ILS or a VOR that's out of service, or something, with, like for instance, if they had a VOR that was out of service, like one of the main times you'll see an FTC NOTAM that actually a dispatcher will care about is if you see this missed approach procedure here, it says climbing, you climb to 9,900 feet and then outbound on the EHK VOR. Well, if this EHK VOR was out of service, that would mean that this missed approach could not be flown. So sometimes when they have a VOR that's out of service that's part of a missed approach procedure for the ILS of that airport, they will issue an FTC NOTAM that gives an alternate missed approach procedure that does not include that VOR. Because if a VOR on your missed approach procedure is out of service, it makes it so that you cannot use that ILS at all. Even though everything on it is working, it's just that one VOR that's only part of the missed approach that makes the whole thing not usable. So when that happens, instead of making the whole approach not usable because of one little VOR on the missed approach, they will just issue an alternate missed approach procedure that includes a different VOR if there's one available. And then that makes it so then you can disregard that one VOR that's out of service and still use the ILS. So it's rare, but that's one of the only times you really ever see it. The other times are too is sometimes when they have ILS issues and things like that, sometimes they will issue an FTC NOTAM and increase the landing minimums. But like I say, the only thing that would ever prompt you to look at FTC NOTAMs would be something you saw in the D NOTAMs, in the local NOTAMs. The only other time I can think of using FTC NOTAMs is sometimes FTC NOTAMs, when you have a VOR out of service as well, sometimes it makes, depending on how much an airport relies on that VOR, sometimes it'll make it so that that airport is not authorized to be used as an alternate airport, if that makes sense. you can still use it as a destination. It doesn't affect you necessarily as your destination, but if you were planning to use it as an alternate, you can't list it as an alternate. And where you would see that would be in an FTC note. It'll say like this: ILS or localizer runway 20, and then below it it'll say alternate minimums NA. So that means that you could not use that approach or that airport essentially as an alternate airport on your release. So is it enough to make you want to bang your head on the tables yet? Here's one that increases minimums right here. So this is for Denver. ILS or localizer runway 8. The straight-in localizer 8, minimum descent altitude of 5740. Height above touchdown, 386, all categories. Visibility for Cat C and D goes up to RVR 3500. And yeah, really won't read the rest of it, but that basically means that you have to look up the ILS or localizer runway 8, and now these are the new minimums instead of what it says on the chart. So the chart is going to most likely have minimums that are lower than this, but you now need to go off of these ones. Then same with this one. It's an RMP approach, but it's just increasing the landing minimums. And it tells you the reason why. If you can see here, it's because there's a crane that's at 5,475 feet mean sea level, 4,420 feet west of runway 8. So because of that crane that's out there, it's making these weather minimums increased on runway 8. And it's for really every approach. The ILS localizer runway 8, the RNAV RNPZ runway 8, the RNAV GPS runway 8. The takeoff minimums are also increased, but it's also says because of this crane.
What exactly is the crane doing that's causing all of this?
Well, that's the thing. So
A mile away.
the crane is, yeah, it's almost a mile away, which it still might be on the airport, but let's see. Runway 8, 5,000, or sorry, 4,000, well, yeah, 4,420 feet west of runway 8. So, yeah, I don't know exactly. I'll show you what, most of you may already know what Denver looks like, but
Is it to alleviate congestion? Well, I mean, that would now congestion.
oh, it's the 10-9 chart that I want. Okay. So runway 8 is this runway right here. That crane, 4,420 feet west, so that crane is somewhere over in here. But it would just affect somebody that's coming in and landing, going this direction and landing on runway 8.
I think that's
So the one thing though about Denver is that runway 8 is never used for landing, so it doesn't even matter. Runway 8 is only used for takeoff, and the only time they ever use this runway at all for landing is when they are landing on 2-6 going this way, but they never land on 8 going that direction. They will land on 7 down here, but never on 8. It's just kind of the same thing. They also never land on 2-5 going this way. So, but they take off on 2-5. Anyway. So that is FTC NOTAMs. Any questions on those? They're kind of not that fun to look at. Let's see if there's any others that are good. Most of all these are. Let's see if LA has anything good. Anyway, yeah, just remember FTC NOTAMs are just changes to published instrument procedures. So any chart, any takeoff procedure, landing procedure, anything that there's a chart for at an airport that that requires some sort of a change would be in an FTC NOTAM.
So unless something that's going to affect from the D NOTAMs, pretty much don't need those done.
Yeah, unless you're seeing something in the D NOTAMs that would prompt you to look at them, then yeah, there's if you breeze through the D NOTAMs and don't see anything that caught your eye, then that's usually going to mean that the FTC NOTAMs also don't have anything that are going to catch your eye. Okay. Okay, so now kind of what we want to look at is, let's see, all this stuff's going to be covered. Okay, so now kind of the next thing that we want to start diving into is actual ATC flight plan stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up Sky Vector. So how many of you guys have had a chance to kind of play around with Sky Vector a little bit? Most of you guys? Okay. So I'm going to just show you guys real quick. Somebody throw out a city pair. We're just going to do kind of a mock. The only thing we're doing on it is just simply showing how we write a flight, like a flight strip is what we're going to do. Phoenix to LA. Phoenix to LA. Everyone go with Phoenix to LA. So what we do when we are creating a flight plan, so think of this process as we are determining what our route of flight is going to be. Like for this first time that we look at this, we're not taking anything into consideration like weather or anything like that. We're just trying to figure out the shortest, simplest, most economical flight path from Phoenix to LA, abiding by the rules that we know we need to abide by, like using a CID if there's one available. Obviously, Phoenix is a very busy airport to depart from. They're going to definitely want us to use a CID. LA, for arriving, obviously they're going to want us to use a STAR, same reasons, busy airport, traffic congestion, ATC workload. And then everything in between, the objective in this class is that when we create a flight plan, we want to, like I said, always use a CID if available, and we take the CID and we fly it to a transition point onto hopefully first a jet route is the first choice, and second would be a Victor route. Does everyone remember the difference between jet and Victor routes? Jet is the higher altitude routes, 18,000 feet and above, and Victor routes are 18,000 feet and below. So now the thing is, though, is there's a lot more Victor routes than there are jet routes. So sometimes it convenes you a little bit more to fly and your transition. So every CID, you basically take off from the airport, and they have several paths that you can follow, okay? So big airports are going to have several CIDs. And so what I'm going to do is let's zoom into, let's see, world high. Let's zoom into Phoenix. Now we're looking right now at the high chart here. Let's see. Oh, that's Albuquerque. There's Phoenix right there. Okay. So this is Phoenix, but we're looking at the high chart. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Phoenix. This is now, we're looking at the Phoenix terminal area chart here. But this, is showing us kind of the outline. The yellow is going to be kind of the outline of the city. But basically, there's going to be CIDs. The airport is right there in the middle. But there's going to be CIDs that take traffic out this way, out to the west, out to the east, the northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast. So it's going to have usually CIDs that will go all directions, depending on which direction you want to go. If we're going Phoenix to LA, obviously we want to find a CID that goes to the west, right? So what we do when we look up CIDs is that when you're in SkyVector here, what you can first of all do is you can click on this little thing here that says flight plan up here in the top left. Click on flight plan. And right here, you can type in, you're going to type in KPHX for Phoenix, and you're going to type in KLAX. And then you can just hit enter, right? And it's going to bring up your flight plan like this. So it automatically draws this line in here for you. But this line is basically just a straight line, direct line from Phoenix to LA. We know that obviously we cannot just fly a straight line from Phoenix to LA. But this is what the flight plan software thinks you want to do because all you typed in was Phoenix to LA, right? However, that's how you kind of start your flight plan. So you can bring up your flight plan again, but when you type in Phoenix and LA, it then puts this, it puts like the name of the airport out here to the right, and then when you hover over it like this, it brings up this other little thing here of all of the charts. Let's see, I need Phoenix. Phoenix's charts are all right here. It starts giving you a list of all the charts that are in here. So these are all the instrument approach procedures. These are all the departure procedures. You can see there's a ton. And then these are all the stars. So you got a lot of options. We specifically right now are looking for departure procedures, a CID out of Phoenix. So now just by looking at these, you can't tell which direction these are going. So we got to just kind of figure out what we want to use. Now let's see here.
Who gets to name these? Is it the FAA or is it just like?
It's really at the airport. So CIDs and stars, you'll notice as you start looking at them, are it's different for every airport, but a lot of them name them after like landmarks around the area. A lot of them name them after sports teams. Like if you look at the
Like Buckeye One?
yeah, so the Buckeye is a VOR, but I'm not sure it's out to the west. Like I know that the Buckeye VOR is west of Phoenix, so that's going to be one of the CIDs we look at first. But like a lot of like if you look at Houston and the stars that go into Houston, there's like the Astros 2 arrival. There's the Texans 4 arrival. There's the Rocket. So they name them after their sports teams. Chicago does the same thing. But some of them also, like if you look at Nashville, it names them after like country singers. If you look at Memphis, it names them after different like foods. Like it has like or like barbecue places. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Anyway, let's take a look. So you can just actually bring this up. This is the Buckeye 4, and it'll bring up the chart over here. You can expand it out if you want it to go full screen. Let's see here. Yeah, rotate. There we go. Now, when you're looking at these charts in SkyVector are the government charts. Okay, so these are not the Jeppesen charts. So like I said, you're going to see a mixture. In this class, you're going to see a mixture of both charts, and that's really just kind of more to have you be familiar with both of them. But once you get into an airline environment, and that's any airline, SkyWest or anywhere else, you're going to pretty much exclusively just be looking at Jeppesen charts. But there's not a lot of difference, and for the most part, they look the same. Like I'll show you this Buckeye 4 in a Jeppesen chart as well, just so you can compare. But when you're looking at this, this is showing us this is showing us the direction of travel. Here we go. This is showing us the direction of travel. Oh, did that just zoom in? Oh, I didn't want to zoom in. Anyway, so you can. So this is basically, these are the runways in Phoenix right here, but it's saying that you can either use this CID going this way or that way. Like you can use it going either direction. Just because you don't necessarily know what direction they're going to be taking off and landing, but some CIDs will have these arrows only pointing one direction, and that means that they can only be used when the traffic is taking off pointed in that direction. If you see the double arrows, that means you can use it for either direction. So just know that when you're looking at these. So let's say we're taking off going to the west. It means you can take off on any one of these runways, any of the airports or the runways that have an arrow on it means you can take off going this or either direction on any of their runways and still use this CID. But when you take off, you initially follow this line, and then you plug this into the aircraft, but it knows that you're following this line here, and you fly first of all at heading 240. And this means for this little thing here means for 13 miles. So this little section is 13 miles. So when you take off, the very first thing you do is you fly heading 240 for 13 miles. Once you get to 13 miles, you then switch and fly heading 280. And you fly that, let's see, all the way to where you basically intercept the 257 degree radial from the Buckeye VOR right here. So anyway, but ultimately, basically the idea here is that you're following this path, and then when you get to the Buckeye VOR, the CID itself has 3 different options depending on which direction you're going. Oops. You can go north up towards the Parker VOR. You can take kind of more the central route that goes out here over to the Palm Springs VOR, or you can stay on the southern route towards the Blythe VOR. Now, when you look at all of these different options here, each one of these, if you see any of these boxes like this, it's telling you that it's a VOR first and foremost. But when you see these boxes with the coordinates in here like this, when these are listed on the CID like this, this means that they are all what are called transition points on a CID. Okay. So when you as a dispatcher are picking your route, you pick your CID first of all, and this one is a great one to pick because it goes straight west of Phoenix. But the next option is that on this CID we need to pick which VOR we want to use as our transition point. Now, since LA and Phoenix are really kind of close together, it's going to be kind of a more unique flight plan, because the stars that go into LAX kind of overlap with the Cids in Phoenix because they're so close together. So a lot of times, and you're going to find this to be true with a lot of different airports, typically what happens, on a normal, kind of more of a lengthy flight plan, you're going to have your origin airport using a CID going out to a transition point and then connecting to a jet route in the general direction of where you want to go. As long as you're following a jet route, you follow that jet route to a transition point on a star for your destination airport. And then, you fly the star down into the airport, you land. Now, if the airports are really close together, sometimes the star transition point, the CID transition point, sometimes may be the same as the star transition point. Like the final point on the CID is the first point on the star, if that makes sense. And you've got no in between. You've got no jet route environment, basically. It's just CID directly to star. Salt Lake to Denver is a perfect example. The last point on the CID out of Salt Lake is the first point on the star on the normal route, like going into Denver. So you fly, I don't know if it's the Ensign departure, but you fly it basically out to Hayden, Colorado, and then the Hayden VOR is the first point on the CID, or on the star going into Denver. So you just transition immediately to the star from the CID. So that's just when they're really close together. So when you're in that situation, before you can really figure out what CID transition you want to use, sometimes you have to do it backwards, and you got to figure out, well, I probably need to figure out what star transition I want to use. So let's just X out of this for a second and just kind of zoom in. One of the nice things about using this straight line initially is that you can see the straight line obviously represents the shortest possible route, between the two cities. So when you are zooming in on this, let's zoom into, or let's switch back to the high. Using the high is a little bit better because you can see, the most direct path. You can kind of see right here that it gets really close to using the Buckeye VOR. So you know that that's a good CID to use. And then as it goes west, you can see right here, this is the Blythe VOR. So you remember that Blythe is one of the transitions on the CID. You can see up here the Parker VOR. You remember that's also one of the transitions, but that's a lot further north. You can kind of get an idea of maybe which transition you want to use based on what is the closest to the direct route. One of the other ones was the Palm Springs VOR, right? So the Palm Springs VOR, where are you? Yeah, there you go. So it's out here. So you got Palm Springs VOR right there. So that was one of the transition points on that CID as well. So you can kind of see that CID trend goes clear out to Palm Springs. So that is almost right on the direct route. So as far as I can tell, the best CID transition as of right now is probably Palm Springs. But that's going to also be dependent upon what options are available for our star. So I'm going to hover over Los Angeles, scroll down to the stars, and let's see here. Now you're going to notice that when you guys are looking at these, you're going to have to, go in and back out and in and back out just to figure out which one even is on the same side of the airport that you want. So that's normal. I'm trying to just see if I can remember which one it is off the top of my head. Bassett Fort comes from north. I believe I think the river. So that one. So yeah, not the river. Let's see. Oh, maybe it's the chemo. No. So that one is for, looks like coming down from the north. Okay. This one should work for us. So this one is the Bassett 4 arrival. Actually, you know what? That one may not even work either. It's not south enough. Six. That's, yeah, from the northwest. Oldie, nope. The red eye really comes in from the other side. Sad. So the one thing is, in this class, one thing you'll want to know real quick too is when we do the actual flight planning, when we do our flight planning stuff, we are only going to use ground-based navigation in this class. And that's really just for the simplification of learning how to flight plan a little bit better. So even though we've learned about GPS and RNAV and all those things, we are not going to use any SIDS, stars that are RNAV or GPS or any Q routes. Everything will be non-RNAV SIDS and stars to either Victor or jet routes basically going to VORs, anything ground-based. So it'll kind of make it a little bit easier. Let's see, ocean. What's that? Just gonna have to start at the top, go down. See, that's the thing is there may not be one. Looked at Lena. See, I'm not looking at anything that's RNAV. That's the more part. That's the Ocean 3. The 1. Yeah, so we may have to just use the Bassett for. Now that if I remember correctly, that seems to ring a bell because I don't think that Palm Springs has, or like any of those VORs are transitions for LA. So anyway, so let's look at this. 29 Palms is going to be, I guess, the one we're going to want to use. So if we come back in here and look at 29 Palms on here, that VOR is right there. if you look at it, the thing for it is clear up here, like the little label, but it's pointing down to this. So if you go back and if you kind of follow this route backwards, you can see that that Parker VOR is on that same jet route. So now we probably want to use the Parker transition off of our previous Cid. So when we write this now, the way that we're going to do this is the very first thing we put. So in this little box down here, we start off, it already knows our origin and our destination. So it knows that we're starting in Phoenix and it knows we're going to LA. So we just need to plug in everything in between it now. So when we look at this, remember we're going to use the Buckeye 4. You have to go into it to see how to actually write this on a flight plan. So when I bring this back up, you can see, so let me switch it back. Right up here at the very top, it says BXK4. That is basically the abbreviation that you're going to use in an ATC strip for it. So when I go back into my flight plan over here, we are going to start off. Now, like I say, it knows that we're starting in Phoenix. So the next thing we're going to write is BXK4 right there. And then you put a dot. And what I'm going to show you eventually too is, I'm going to bring up this real quick and just do a new sheet of paper just to kind of show you guys. Zoom all the way in here. When we're filing a flight plan, flight plans always, now a SkyVector, like I said, plugs in the origin of the destination for us, but on an actual flight plan strip, the way it would start is your origin. So you would write Phoenix, just like that. And then anytime that you're putting in the next thing, you always put a dot. Okay? So it would be KPHX dot. Now, then if you're using a Cid, it's going to be basically the name of the Cid, which is that thing I just looked up, right? So we're using the Buckeye 4, which is the BXK4. And then you're going to put a dot, period, I should say. And then the next point on there is going to be your transition point. Now remember back in here, we had, I'm not going to bring up the chart again, but we had Parker was one of the transitions. Blythe was one of the transitions. Buckeye itself is also a transition, so you could put BXK4.BXK, but basically you're going to be putting the 3-letter identifier of the VOR that you're using as the transition. We're using Parker now, so we're going to put, so PKE is for Parker. So you're going to put dot PKE, just like that. Now going back into the map, so that takes us all the way. So the nice thing about SIDS and stars, when you're looking at it from an ATC flight plan creation, from a dispatcher perspective, is that if we didn't have a SID in this case, we would have had to basically file Phoenix. So if you don't have a SID, the way that you would file a flight plan, what I'm going to show you here, I'm just going to write it below this one. This same flight plan without the SID, you have to type in every single point to get to where you just got to on the transition. So when you're able to list a SID, it actually takes down even dispatcher workload because you don't got to, it knows that all the points on that SID are already assumed on that, and it'll map it right out for you. But if you don't have that, if you don't have a SID available, you got to do Phoenix starting out, and then you have to figure out what VOR is basically the VOR for the airport. Now in this case, it's the Phoenix VOR, but it's labeled as PXR. So when you write it out as a flight plan, oops, you put Phoenix just like that, just like our other one, except now you put dot dot. When you put dot dot, it means that you're flying direct to somewhere. That means you are not using a jet airway, basically. When you're using just the single periods, then that means that you're assumed to be on like an airway or a Cid or a star. When you do dot dot, it means you're flying in between without actually using an airway. So you have to start out Phoenix and then direct to the VOR for that airport, which is PXR. Now from PXR, you might be able to pick up an actual jet route. So from PXR, you can actually pick up, it's on jet route 65. So then you could type it in as, you don't have to use the dot dot anymore, but you would now just do dot J65, because you're basically leaving Phoenix, going directly to the Phoenix VOR, and then getting on J65, which is an airway. And then on the J65, everyone saw where I got J65 from, right? If you see this, as J65 is going west here, see how it makes a loop around this VOR as compared to like these other ones that the line stops and then it starts again? Like J65, it stops right here. It goes, you don't see it going like through, like you don't see it like this one where it goes around it. That means any VOR, or any jet route that you see like this that stops and goes through like the VOR, like where, this means that VOR is on that jet route. So the Phoenix VOR is on all of these jet routes. But if you see it doing this, that means that this J65 does not connect to Buckeye. It is not on that VOR. The next point that's actually on this on this jet route is this intersection down here, because you can see it unlinks and then starts again. That means that this CAFA intersection down here is on that jet route. So if we're going out to Parker, you can kind of see here that jet route 65 goes west. It skips this Buckeye VOR, but it goes out to this CAFA intersection. So when you're writing it, you would do dot, the next point would be CAFA. And then from CAFA, we know we need to go up to Parker, but you can see all these different jet routes are connected to this CAFA intersection here. Well, Parker is going to be up here, so this jet route 104 here actually also is connected to CAFA. So now at CAFA, you have the option, you came in on jet 65, now you have the option to leave on any of these. You can go this way on 104, you can stay on 65 and go this way. For our purposes, we need to get up to Parker, and that's going to be this 104 route here. You can see 104 comes up, intersects with Messy, and then goes over to Parker. So 104 from CAFA to Parker. Now, even though this intersection right here, this Colts intersection and this Messy intersection are on this 104, the only time you need to list all of these points here, when you get onto a jet route and off of a jet route, you only need to list where you're getting on and where you're getting off. You don't have to list any point in between. So what that means in our case here is we came in on jet 65, but now we're getting off of jet 65. So that's why we're listing CAFA, because that's our exit point for 65. And now we want to get on 104. So now we just do this dot, which we already have, and then we just put in 104. And then we're getting on 104, but at the point that we actually get off of 104 is not till this Parker VOR. So we can actually now just put .pke. And that will include everything in between Kaffa and Parker on Jet Route 104. So I wanted to get us to this point. So you can see that by listing a Cid up in this one, it's a lot easier. It got us out to Parker without having to do any of this crap. So, but just so you know, though, that this here is the process when you do not have a Cid or a star. So look for Cids and stars, basically. But if you don't have one, and we will have some flight plans that don't have one, then you'll want to do it this way. You're also going to see some flight plans that the airport does have Cids or stars. It has both, but not necessarily one that goes the direction you want to go. Okay, so that's kind of another common question is, well, I've got this, I want to go straight north, but the only Cid that this airport has is straight south. So does that mean that I have to file a Cid and go south and then curve around? No, it does not. If the Cid does not go the direction that you are trying to go, you don't have to inconvenience yourself and go follow the only Cid available. If there's not available for your direction of travel, you can just do it like this, like I'm doing. It is more work, but it's less flying. Technically, it's just more writing. So
you just do it until you get to that point where you have to do it like this.
Yeah, but if there is one going the direction you want to go, then use it. So I'm going to go back up to the top one here now. So if we file that Buckeye 4 Cid out to Parker, then that's all we got to write. All of this stuff is taken care of. It's already assumed that we do basically all of this right here. So we're to Parker now, and from Parker we need to go to the 29 Palms VOR, which is the transition for our star. So I'm going to zoom back over here into Parker. So now we're here at Parker. We want to go to 29 Palms, which is right here. So we're going to use this same 104 or J4. So when it has two, that means that it's Jet Route 4 and 104. So we can pick J4 or 104, whichever one we want. I usually go with the less amount of numbers. So we're going to go dot J4. And then we know that we're going to 29 Palms, and that's where our star begins. And so we're going to go dot TNP. And then all we got to do at this point is see what that, how we write Bassett 4. Bassett 4. It looks like we just write it as, well, just as it says, Bassett 4, B-A-S-E-T 4. So dot Bassett 4, and then that star, we know it takes us into LA, so we just then go dot KLAX. So that would be the full flight plan strip for this route, using a Cid and a star. So really the only thing we had to really plug into this was just this J4, really just the J4. Because no matter what, we had to list this part is our Cid, and this part is our star. So now when I go back into SkyVector, remember I don't need to do the origin and the destination here. So all I'm going to do is go BXK4 and then just type in all the in-between stuff. To Parker, J4 dot TNP dot Bassett 4. And then it knows that I'm going to LA. So now if I hit enter on that, for some reason it didn't change. Maybe it's because that arrow wasn't there. Let me redo it.
So why wouldn't you end up just going from Parker to 29 Palms and leave that at J4?
because you got to stay on a jet route.
Maybe because you didn't write
Wouldn't
out
that
for it.
almost be implied though? If you're going between these?
Not necessarily, no, because these maps are not to scale. So just because it looks like it's direct, and it very well may be straight up direct in, you know. However, sometimes there's little changes on these routes that change direction and stuff like that. So by typing in J4 and putting that as your actual route, both your computer in the airplane know that you're following Jet4, and ATC also knows you're following Jet4. If you're putting, the only other way you could have done that, you're basically saying like you would write it direct. So you would write, if you're going to write direct without using J4, you do obviously the TN or the PKE ... TNP. But that's basically saying you're doing the direct route, which it might be direct. J4 may be that exact route, but it also may not be. Yeah. Yeah. And in this class, the only time it's really okay to just go direct is from the airport to the first VOR. Not really in between. There might be a few little cases where we can do it, but we don't. We try and always have a point on the route here. For some reason, I'm not sure why this is not letting me. Maybe this one is. Yeah, there it goes. Okay, so when you type it into SkyVector, you don't use the dots. You just use a space. But in real life, ATC should look like that. Anyway, so now that I've typed it in, it actually now, if you zoom out, it shows you that route. That's kind of weird though, because it's for some reason it's not connecting to the. I'm not sure why that's not. I wonder if I wrote the BXK wrong, because it's not actually mapping out the Cid for some reason. BXK4.
So on these, they have like in the parentheses, it's like bxk4.bxk. On this one, you use the first one, but on the Bassett, you use the one on the right. How do you determine which one you're going to put in there? The one was reversed. The other one was Bassett.Bassett4.
So the way it's because it's the Cid and the star difference. So on a Cid, it's going to be on the left side because you're going out, and on the star, it's going to be coming into it. So you're going to see it before, and then you're going to see the star. So, but the BXK part is just simply because it's the Buckeye VOR. Like that's the main transition, but that doesn't mean that you have to use that one. You do use the BXK4 portion of it, name-wise, but you can use any of the transitions. So why it's not picking up the actual real route, I'm not sure why it's not. Anyway, that's weird. .4 Bassett. See, if you look at here, just kind of show you what I'm talking about. For some reason, it's not putting in the route correct. But when I click on Bassett 4, see how it highlights the portion of that route? See how it has turns in it, like right here? So it's actually picking up the actual star, like every point along it, but when I do BXK4, for whatever reason, it's not picking up. See, this route actually goes out to Buckeye, and then it comes over and up like this. So anyway, I'm not sure why it's not picking that up, but if you actually look at the route, if it doesn't pick it up correctly, then sometimes you may have to just go in and actually type it in direct. Put that Buckeye to J4.
You think you wrote it exactly as it had it in the Cid?
Well, yeah, you can. I mean, that's basically the next thing that you would do, is you'd have to write it in that way. See, that's the problem, though, is then it changes it to undefined here in the middle, which is supposed to be J4. Anyway, I don't even know where it has me now. I guess I'm lost. There. So yeah, you go J4, then to Parker. Actually, you just go J4 to 29 Palms. Yeah, that's probably the best it'll get right there. Anyway, that's what it should look like. So there's you can switch it back down to make it just go to the first transition and then type in the route. So that's what I had to do, I guess, to make this one work. But anyway, so yeah, Buckeye 4 to the Buckeye VOR now, and then just following J4 over to 29 Palms. So anyway, so that's how the route looks now. But that's pretty much the shortest, simplest route you can really do for it. So, and that's probably the canned route too for that city pair. If you were to look it up, like in SkyWest Online, like on the one that we use, you know. So yeah, that's basically the idea of what you want to do on any city pair. So I mean, you know, if you have some time this week and you want to kind of just, you know, pick two city pairs, maybe have them a little bit further apart, but just see if you can create a route using Cids and stars and jet routes and, you know, transitions, and then just kind of play around with this and see if you can get your flight plan thing to work, and just kind of use it to see, you know, just see if you can successfully get a route in there according to the way you type it in, and then just kind of get used to this model of how we type stuff in here. So, you know, if you were continuing to write this in, you know, in our other, like, not using the star now, so we didn't use the Cid on this one, but if you went to Parker right there, then it would be J4 to 29 Palms to let's see here how far it went. You basically have to bring up the star and follow it in. So you go from 29 Palms to this IPHIW. So you'd have to type that in, and then you got to type in the ARV, ARRVD. So you'd have to type in every single one of these all along the route to Paradise, and then over to the CAX, and then there's the Bassett intersection right there. And then you have to type in the down, the reader. Anyway,
So
kind of see what I mean.
is that something that we would be expected to do, is write every single one along the line, or just?
Not if you have a Cid and a star. The way that you're expected to do it on your exams and stuff, if you've got a Cid and a star, you're expected to do it in the simplest form possible. So, yeah, if you don't have... Yeah, well, the thing is, if you have a Cid and a star available and you write it like this, then it would be something that would be probably docked, if that makes sense. So if you have a star and you didn't use it, you know, that's something they would look for. They want to look for you actually using Cids and stars. So.
Okay.
Any questions on that stuff? Like I say, this stuff will be done and repeated over and over on the next couple of weeks on every flight plan. And we are going to do several flight plans from start to finish in class, so before you even do any on your own completely. So you should be well versed in all of these processes before you're actually expected to be out and doing it on your own.
So is this the flight plan, or is this just one piece?
This is the entire flight plan right there. Phoenix to LA, that's exactly the way you would see it. Let me just see if I can show you just a quick example, maybe.
Basically do that 50 times in one day?
Well, you don't, if you were doing it manually, yes. But when you're doing this, like at work at SkyWest, unless you're building a flight, you're never going to have to put together a strip like that. Unless you're building like a flight plan to live that. So every one of our city pairs has a few pre-built routes that are already in the system. Like if there's no weather, or there's nothing impeding it from flying just the normal, most direct route possible using Cids and stars and everything like we just did, then you're not going to have to do anything because that route is already in our system and it's already built. And so the only time you actually build a route is when you don't have a route available that actually accommodates whatever you're trying to do, but it would usually be for weather avoidance or something like that. Or if you got some sort of an MEL that makes you not be able to fly over a certain area or at a certain altitude. I mean, a lot of different reasons, but normally, I mean, you're not going to be building routes very much. I mean, you might go weeks without building a route. So just to kind of give you an idea, but when you learn it here, in class and stuff, all of our manual stuff, you'll be doing it for every flight in this class, but real life dispatch release, you can do, like if there's nothing going on, the majority of your dispatch releases will be done in under a minute, start to finish. So let's give you an idea. The first time you do a manual flight plan, and even when you are the very best, at it, like the best you'll ever get at doing, like the best I can do a manual flight plan start to finish right now. Doing everything that we're going to do in this class would take me 2 to 3 hours. So just to kind of give you an idea.
What happened that day, like the system went down and everyone was having to do manual flight planning?
Nobody does manual flight
Well,
planning.
someone said a couple months ago that happened. I don't know. Like, I was
The
there.
system, yeah, going down, but
Okay.
SkyWest, if our system is down, we do not operate. So yeah, we don't do manual flight planning at all. We got too many flights. If you can imagine, I mean, if you started doing manual flight plans and every one took you 2 to 3 hours, and that's the thing, that's when you're good at it. Doing, the only reason I can do it in 2 to 3 hours is because I teach the class and I'm used to doing it. But if you were to take the average person that hasn't done a manual flight plan since they were in dispatch school, it probably will take 5 or 6 hours. The first one you guys do will probably take 5 hours, 4 or 5 hours. Every single one of them will, the hope is that you can kind of get down to, when you take your actual practical with the FAA, that, it's even expected, in that it might take you 4 hours to do the flight plan. So that's just how long it takes. It's not because you don't know how to do it, or that it's just the processes. I mean, when you get in there and you start calculating wind and fuel burns, I mean, you're going to end up having to do all of this stuff. Not only do you got to put together the flight plan, you got to do all the weather, you got to do all the fuel burns, you got to do all of the performance manually. So it's really just that there's so many steps that even if you're really good at it and you know exactly what you're doing start to finish, and you know what formulas and everything you're using for your time versus fuel versus all the things, then it's still, the best case scenario is that you could do it in maybe 2 to 3 hours, and that's just breezing through it, basically knowing everything and not even having to second guess. So yeah, so if that gives you any hope. They just take long. But the thing is, though, I mean, if you have any interest, obviously you're not going to be in this class unless you're interested in this stuff, but honestly, I love doing manual flight plans. Like when I was in dispatch school, I was like going home and I was creating my own stuff, just because I was bored and practicing during the week. I would just pick a city pair and I would just do a manual flight plan and find my own weather. I was just doing it for fun because it's entertaining. I really actually enjoy doing it. And I think once you see it that is the funnest part of this class, is the manual flight planning. So hopefully that will change whatever seeds I just planted. Hopefully that will reverse. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it takes that long at all. It seems like it takes 45 minutes to an hour. But then you look at the clock, holy crap, 3 hours. So it goes way fast because most people in here will probably enjoy doing it. It's fun to do, fun to go through, and when you think about at the end of it, when you think wow, I could actually take a plane and totally create, by just giving me weather and everything else, I could figure out a flight plan and I could actually literally figure out the fuel burn and everything else based on current weather conditions. It's kind of cool to think that you can actually do that, at the end of all this. So yeah, so you should enjoy it. I think that at the end you guys will be saying, yeah, it's pretty fun. So
How long does the practical take then?
So the practical takes, well, the thing is, so the way that Greg does his, he just starts off by just giving you the flight plan. And so there's an oral portion and then there's the practical flight plan portion, but they're kind of usually just lumped into one. So he just gives you the flight plan, has you start getting to work, doing your stuff, and he'll just ask you questions along the process. Okay, so I saw that you did this here. What if we decided to throw in this MEL? It's not that you're going to go and change everything you just did, but you're just going to say oh, well, if I did that, then this now would be my restriction. He's just going to ask you random oral questions along the process to suffice the oral portion. So it's all mixed into one. It's just that you might just suddenly get a question at some point along along while you're doing the flight plan is all. So, and he may have another point, like when you get done, he may have another little small portion of just, he asked you like 5 or 6 questions in a row about stuff, but most of it, the whole thing is just your flight plan. So he usually allots 3 to 4 hours of time. And you can go over and stuff. It's not like it's totally timed unless you're just taking way, way long. But he he usually expects, and you'll know how fast you can do a flight plan at that point. Like for you guys, like you'll know that you need to plan for whatever 3 hours to do your flight plan. So you'll be pretty comfortable at doing it by that point. So basically, be doing a flight plan, a flight plan or 2 here in class per week, in addition to having you guys do a flight plan or 2 or 3 during the week at home. So like once we get to that point where we're in manual flight planning, like on those off non-class days, all you're going to really see is me giving you an email with a city pair and a weather packet, and I'll give you the NOTAMs, I'll give you the weather, I'll give you the tail number, and that's literally just what you're doing for that day. But that's what it'll be almost every single day, is just I'm going to give you, and it'll get harder. Like we'll start out with good weather, no MELs, stuff like that. And then as we get further on, you're going to see, I'm going to give you a weather packet just in the email, and you're going to see the city pair, and it's going to be thunderstorms or with a weather radar MEL with, whatever. So that's kind of what you can expect to see. Kind of, we don't really go backwards, but you're going to obviously start seeing everything we've learned thrown in and put into practice though. So there will also be some too, like where you have to make, with every flight you have to make a decision on whether it's legal to launch at all. So you're going to, especially once we really get especially towards the end, I'm going to send you some that may not even be legal to launch. So there's going to be some where you're going to have to say, you're going to have to email me basically and ask for a different airplane, because that airplane with that MEL is not legal to go because of whatever it has. Like you're going to have to send me an email saying, I can't do this flight plan because I need a different airplane because of this MEL, or I need to delay the flight because the weather at my ETA is below my landing minimums, or there's going to be ones that will need a takeoff alternate. There's going to be anything that we've seen that you can think of, you'll see in the flight planning basically. So, but no worries, you'll enjoy it.